Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second season of the Traveling Métis podcast, the podcast that dives headfirst into Métis culture. I am your host, Samantha Loney. We're back with a bunch of great guests, so pop in your headphones, grab your paddle, and hop into that canoe. We're about to head down the river to visit with my fellow Métis. Tanshi, everyone. For you non-Michif speakers, Tanshi means hello. No, we're not having a language lesson for today's show, but that word does have a special significance to today's episode because it is in the name of today's guest's business. Today, we have Emily O'Hara from Tanshi Clay. I'm going to speak to Emily about her business a little later in the show, but I wanted to talk to her about what it's like being a Métis person living in the big city. Emily currently lives in Toronto. Along with being a small business owner, Emily is the granddaughter of a residential school survivor, a source of great trauma for her family that has prevented the passing down of culture. Unfortunately, this is a story not uncommon for many Indigenous peoples, but Emily is healing the wounds of the past by exploring her native identity in the big city. I wanted to have you on because when most people think of Indigenous culture, they don't really think of these urban environments. But you told me that that is where you actually started to get deeper into your connection to Métis culture. So I was wondering, first of all, how in like an urban environment like Toronto were you able to find a connection to culture?
So when I first moved to Toronto, I was feeling really isolated, and I found the Toronto-York Region Métis Council, and I decided to join because I know they had like a lot of activities, and I thought it would be a good chance for me to kind of like build a sense of community and meet other Métis people. So I signed up, but I didn't do events because I was nervous and I didn't really feel like I felt that I fit in this space yet. But then one of the coordinators invited me to vend my products at a powwow last year, 2022. So she wanted me to come to the join table, sell some of my products, and immediately I thought, yes, this is a good way to kind of get into it. So I think initially, like, that was the first powwow I've ever been to, and then having my stuff being able to vend there was like a really good intro to the community and the culture for me, because I didn't realize like how many Indigenous people are in such an urban area. And I think just like going to the powwow and having hundreds of people be there, I was kind of like shocked. I'm from a very, Indigenous small town, but nobody ever really talked about it. Nobody ever really got together. And then I come here and I'm like, whoa, like this is completely different. So that's kind of how I realized, okay, this is something that I definitely want to explore more. I want to get more involved in. And it just kind of really took off from there.
A lot of people aren't aware, like there are like Native friendship centers in cities and things. Like Indigenous people are mobile as well. Like they can move off of a reserve or move out of like their home community and live anywhere they want.
Like I went to the Fire Council for the first time this summer, and there's like a whole strip of like Native resources like on Church Street, like near Regent Park. And I was like, that's so cool.
Yeah, and I was wondering if you could maybe talk about your home community and your journey with your indigeneity.
So it kind of all started in high school. Like I knew I was Native because I'm from Georgian Bay, and we're near like Christian Island, like Penetanguishene, like big Métis roots over there. So I knew, but it was never something that we talked about until, how I remember it, one of my family members was sick and in a hospital. So my mom wanted to do the digging and find our roots to get our citizenship card in order for a person to be buried with the medicine bag ceremony. I didn't really know what was going on. So unfortunately, I don't really know kind of like what family member this was for, but I just know that was kind of what started the fire. So I got my Métis citizenship. And again, because nobody really talked about it, it was kind of like, great, I have this thing that says I'm Native. what does that mean and what do I do with it?
Yeah, like it's so hard when you're new to your culture as well. Like you're like, okay, like you said when you went to like the powwow and stuff, you're like, oh, do I belong here? Like, do I know enough about my culture? And but it's only through doing those things and getting out in your community that you're able to connect to culture.
Yeah, because I think we kind like my family, we got our citizenship, but again, we didn't really practice any like traditional Indigenous teachings or nothing was ever passed down to us. It was just kind of an identity. It wasn't really ingrained in us. So I think it was more like a label when we first got the card, but now it's definitely blossoming into more of like, I don't know, kind of who you are now, which is nice.
For my family as well, it's like kind of like, oh, you're native. And then my grandparents and their parents were always taught like, oh, don't talk about it. Like if you can hide your indigeneity, because Métis people are often lighter skinned, because we do have that settler background as well, can pass as being white. So I feel like that's kind of, you can go back into your family tree and find like, oh, this is where they stopped doing those things. So I think it's, yeah, always great to hear people at any age going back into their culture.
And I feel like especially like people who are kind of like their 20s are really discovering themselves. And I think it's really great to see like, I really feel like this next generation of indigenous youth is really going to kind of fuel the way for more great things. And yeah, it's super cool.
One of the super cool things we see a lot of Indigenous youth doing to connect back to their culture is starting their own business selling beadwork. This isn't a new idea. Our ancestors have been beading and selling their beadwork for generations. And for Indigenous people who have lost that connection to their ancestors, picking up that needle and thread and pouring those beads onto that beadboard for the first time can be the start of a healing journey. I wanted to get to know Emily's story of not only starting her own business, but using it as a way to heal.
So originally, a few years ago, when polymer clay earrings were all the rage, I don't even know when this was, like maybe 2020, 2019, I thought they were beautiful. So because I'm crazy, I thought, you know what, I'm going to start a polymer clay earring business. And that's why my business is called Tanshi Clay, even though I don't use clay anymore. And then I wanted to kind of pull some Métis roots. So Tanshi, kind of a play on, Michif, hello. So that's why I named it Tanshi Clay. But then when I went to the powwow to vend my clay items and I saw all the beautiful beaded earrings, I was immediately inspired and I bought my first pair. And right after the powwow, I went to Michael's and I got a couple earrings, needles, thread, and I tried making a pair myself. Like it came really easily. I taught myself through just watching like TikToks, YouTube videos. My grandma used to bead, but unfortunately she passed and that was never passed down to my mom and I. So my mom doesn't know how to bead, so we kind of skipped a generation and here I am. And then they had another event that they wanted me to vend at. So I beaded like, I think 6 pairs of earrings and I brought them to the second event and I sold out. So that was kind of cool. And that's when I thought like, wow, maybe this is my new thing.
Your new calling that you didn't even know until you started doing it, that you're like, oh, I'm really good at this.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy because with the clay stuff, like I've always been really creative and I like little projects here and there. And the clay, it was fun, but I found like I was forcing myself to do it. I was forcing myself to create. And that's never a good feeling, especially when you're supposed to be enjoying this thing. But with beading, I really liked it. And here I am, a year later, and I still like doing it. So that's a good sign because I lose interest really quickly. But yeah, it felt really natural. And even like when I showed up the next day, everybody was like, whoa, like we didn't know that you beaded. And I'm like, me neither.
Do you have tips for if anybody's self-teaching themselves how to do this?
Yeah, honestly, like TikTok has been such a good resource for me. Literally just type in like beaded earring tutorial and there's so many. Another great resource has been Sunday Lace Creations. They actually have diagrams of kind of where the needle would go, how the thread would lay out. So that was really helpful when learning like different stitches. And I believe they also have diagrams on the difference between 1 needle versus 2 needle beading, which is kind of cool. But yeah, definitely TikTok and then the Sunday Lace Creations diagrams.
Do you think that's been a healing experience for you?
Yeah, like 100%. I think, again, when I first kind of found out I was Métis, I didn't know what that meant. I just kind of walked around saying I was Métis, but I didn't really know what that entailed. And then I think beading kind of helped force me to step outside my comfort zone and really deep dive into my culture and into my history. And through that, like, again, earlier when we were talking about how with all the trauma, and since we're Métis, we're light skinned, like we're very white passing. So it's kind of hush hush that you're Native, right? And in my family, it was extra hush hush because my grandmother, we actually found out this summer that she was in one of the worst residential schools for sexual abuse. And that's kind of why when my mother found our Métis citizenship, everybody kind of shunned us because this was something that we didn't want to talk about. So I think like my family seeing me, beading and embracing this, it's different, but it's a good type of different. And I also feel that it's made me more comfortable in my skin. Like when I first used to go to powwows and events, I have this shirt and it says strong Indigenous woman. I would have this shirt, but I would feel kind of weird wearing it because I dye my hair blonde. I have blue eyes. Like I'm very fair skinned. And people are probably looking at me like, this girl is not Indigenous. Like, what is she doing? But now, like, after meeting so many great people who look like me and who are also Native, I walk in there and I feel like this is my space. I belong. I don't have to, explain myself to anybody. Because I think that was like a big thing in the beginning for me, is constantly feeling the need to justify my identity to others. Even though I don't owe anybody anything, I just felt like part of me inside was screaming, like, don't you hear me? Like, I'm still here, but you're making me seem like I'm not Indigenous enough, which is a really frustrating thing. And I feel like that's something that a lot of Métis people can relate to, because again, it's like, I don't feel Native enough in Native spaces, but then in white spaces, I'm like, hey, hold up. Like, I'm kind of, I'm not completely white. I'm like spicy white. So that's kind of been a cool thing, just seeing my growth and just really owning my identity. I think that's been kind of really powerful for me. And like, it's been really healing for not only me, but my mom as well. Like, although she doesn't know how to bead, like, I bead her things. She's been rocking them. Like, she's been like promoting my business, which is cool. And all my family can see.
Whenever I position myself in Native areas and things like that, I often think of my ancestors and people. Like, hopefully you think of like your grandmother and it's like, you're doing this because she couldn't. She was in a residential school, and a lot of our ancestors were, where it's like they were taught not to celebrate their culture and had to hide it away, and were like physically punished for trying to embrace like language and things like that. So I think anytime I participate and put myself in a Native space, like I always think like it's a heavy weight to carry, but you're like, hey, I'm doing this for my ancestors who couldn't or who were taken out of these areas. Because for some Métis people, it was you stopped being Indigenous because you weren't allowed back in your tribe and things like that. So it's like to be able to do these things and to have young Métis people be like, you know what, I don't look like what Hollywood has said an Indigenous person looks like, but I'm still Native, so I'm going to participate.
Like, I always tell people when they say, oh, you're Native, I'll ask them, well, the medicine wheel, right? You know what all the colors represent on the medicine wheel? The different skin tones of Native people. We come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, and we're all just as valid.
So I wanted to maybe dive in, your experience at your first powwow. You kind of talked about it a little bit, but maybe for people who are nervous, I always meet Métis people who, whenever they tell me they went to a powwow or it's their first one, they're always like, I was so nervous and scared before I went. And then like they ended up having a great time. So maybe if you want to talk a bit about your experience with that.
So roll up to the powwow. And I am nervous because not only am I there, but I'm also vending. And I think because I was still kind of coming to terms with my identity. So again, I was very nervous and I saw everybody in like their regalia and I'm just like, wow, that's so cool. Like, because I've never seen that before. Definitely a lot of nerves, and I kind of more internal, just will people wonder like why I'm here? Am I allowed to be here? I guess just really worrying about what other people would think of seeing this like blonde girl at a powwow made me nervous. But no, like once I kind of relaxed, it definitely had a lot of fun. And I met a lot of people who, again, like look like me, validated me. So that was really great. And then it's a weird thing. I don't know. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I feel like with the grand entry and stuff, I get very emotional. I just remember it being so intense. I've never heard the drums in person before. I've never seen everybody celebrating their regalia. And I just got so emotional. And then that's, the day when I was like, okay, like I'm going to bead. I'm going to go home and bead. So yeah, I definitely would say it was like a spiritual awakening, and just kind of something inside of me was like, yeah, like this is who you are. This is part of your culture. And like, it's okay to, embrace it. But yeah. And then ever since that first powwow, like, it's been great. Now all the other ones I go to, like I don't feel weird. And this summer, I actually for the grand entry and the closing ceremony, I bared the Métis flag, which is really cool.
Do you think it's hard for Métis people when we try to connect to our Indigenous side of the culture, like that stigma of being that half breed of you were talking about, like, oh, I don't belong to this Indigenous culture. I don't belong to this white culture. Like I'm stuck somewhere in between.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, again, this has just been kind of like, your internalized colonialism of just being like, just because you're fair skinned, light hair, whatever it may be, like you're still Indigenous. And I feel like you kind of have to break that first yourself. It's going to be uncomfortable, but until you put yourself in that situation, you're not going to evolve. Right. And I think, again, like I said earlier, the struggle really is like, in native spaces, again, it's definitely more internal because I'm thinking people are going to wonder why I'm there. But in reality, I go there, everybody's so great, so welcoming. Everybody's asking kind of what tribe you are or kind of like what your identity is. And I've never had a negative experience where I felt unwelcome one time. Everybody is so awesome. So I think for anybody who is nervous or, if you're a pasty native person like myself, you're beautiful, you're valid, and you deserve to take up space in these Indigenous spaces.
Yeah, and I think you're right, like working on that internalized colonialism that like we put on ourselves because like for like I don't know, like hundreds of years Métis people have been told like, well, you don't belong anywhere. Like so like we don't want to give you rights as a white person, and then we also don't want to include you in the Indian Act and things because we don't think you're Indian or Native or whatever. So I think, yeah, it's just breaking down all those things that like Métis people have been told for like years. Let's talk a bit about how you said like you just went home and beaded, and then you were like, I'm gonna go sell these at powwows now and markets. And maybe I think for a lot of Indigenous people, that's how they make their money is at these markets. How important are like markets and powwows and in-person like events selling your stuff?
Definitely very important. For me, it's not just about selling the product, but actually feeling like a sense of community. Like I have a website, I had an Etsy, I can sell my stuff online, but I feel like it's just the connection with other Indigenous people that make it so special. And just them being able to see the face behind the creations for me. And just again, building like an overall sense of community. Like when I first started selling in person, I was really nervous. I didn't know anybody, nobody knew me. But now I get really excited because I know a lot of friendly faces. I've made so many friends who have small businesses too. And it's just been a really, really important part in my healing and building community for me. Not every day is a great market day. Like you're not going to sell a bunch of things every day, but even just being there, being surrounded by other Indigenous folk and just, being in the space is really good.
Like you've had a pretty good experience, it sounds like, in Toronto, connecting to culture. But do you think there's anything that could be improved in connecting to Indigenous culture in the GTA, or anything that you would like to see in the future for like Indigenous, or like more specifically, maybe like Métis?
So I think something that could definitely be improved is more like addiction services for Indigenous people specifically. Just because it's such a complex issue, and a lot of my patients were Indigenous, and the wait lists for all these programs are so long. And again, like a lot of Native people, they migrate to the city in hopes to find these programs and to build a better life, but there's really nothing here. So I've been kind of on my sober journey right now. So I'll be 3 months sober next week. And like I didn't have kind of a problem with drinking. I just felt like every time I drank, like nothing really good came out of it. I'm hungover, I don't feel good. And I just feel like every time I drank, I kept thinking of like my ancestors and how alcoholism is so prevalent in Native communities. And I just kind of, it came to a point where I'm like, why am I doing this? And that's kind of why I go back to, I think that, having more addictions and more alcoholic programs for specifically Indigenous people would be so helpful. And maybe like a youth mentorship program, especially around alcohol, because I know, again, like kids and people coming up from the reserves, it's a very different story. And then they come here, they feel lost. They don't know where to get resources, where to find other Indigenous people. That can be very scary.
Because I'm in therapy, because I think most people should be in therapy.
Yeah, me too.
But I actually didn't really get a connection to a therapist until I went to like a Métis specific, like it wasn't like a specific program for Métis people, but it was just a therapist who was Métis. And I'm actually going to have her on the podcast. Like I wasn't able to fully like unpack. And maybe it was because she was Métis, so she had similar experiences too. But I think it's like for anyone, when you're going through something, to have someone you can relate to and have someone who like fully understands your experience, I think does benefit your health.
Yeah, like until I started meeting other Métis people, I felt so isolated, so alone. But then I'd meet all these other Métis people who, again, super fair skin, you know, you wouldn't be able to tell that they're Native. And it just felt so good because they get it. Even if you don't talk about it, you just know that we all have this same lived experience for the most part about feeling kind of displaced and othered in spaces.
And too, with a lot of like Western medicine, it's a lot of like, oh, here's like the Band-Aid solution, when really it's like, okay, like you have to deal with like what's underneath, like spiritually and emotionally, like why are you addicted to alcohol or drugs or whatever your issue may be. Like it's not like, oh, stop doing it and then that's it. It's like, okay, why was I doing this? Is like, and yeah, it might be like intergenerational trauma, or it might be something else that happened.
Yeah, I definitely think that's such a big part because people don't realize, like, again, intergenerational trauma lasts at least 3-4 generations. And people, you know, they'll act out, they'll do things they don't understand why. And like you said, like you really need to dig deep and get in tune with yourself. And I think that's scary for a lot of people.
Even like how you said when you were like, oh, every time I would drink, I would just think of my ancestors. It's like, that's the intergenerational trauma, right? Like, it's like, why am I thinking of them every time?
Yeah, it was so crazy. Like, it just wasn't serving me. Like, it was really hard for me to just have one drink. Like I would have one drink and okay, like what are we going to do now? And I think too, it's kind of opened up my, you know, spiritual journey with my Indigenous self more because I'm kind of navigating new spaces in this new like sober light, which is really cool.
And now you've got a nice business.
Yeah. And I think too, like part of why my business struggled is because I would go out on weekends, you know, have all these plans the next day to, you know, update my website, bead, do whatever. But because I was bedridden all day, I didn't do it. And now, like, you know, I've been beading like a mad lady. I've got, you know, my new website now. I'm on this podcast. Like things are really in motion for me since I stopped drinking. And I think it just really, again, my ancestors are really just saying like, this is the path that you're supposed to be on, which is really cool.
They were warning you. They're like, do not, do not drink.
Yeah, you're getting nothing done.
Thank you for being on the podcast. Maybe if you want to tell people like on social media where they can find you just to see your products.
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and my username is just Tanshi Clay, just how it sounds, TANSHI Clay. And then my website is tanshiclay.com.
I want to thank Emily for sharing her story with us today. We'll leave a link to where you can find her and her business in the show notes. For those pasty-skinned Métis folk listening, or anyone who doesn't feel Indigenous enough, I hope you're inspired to go out and enjoy powwow season this year. It's a great way to celebrate and connect to your Indigenous heritage, and an amazing opportunity to support Indigenous businesses. The economic struggle out there is real, everyone. Please go out and support those businesses in your community. If you can't financially support them, like and share their stuff on social media. It really helps them expand their reach. Marcy for listening, and we'll see you down the river. This episode was written and directed by Samantha Loney, with music composed by Etienne Beausoleil, edited by Cassidy Villebron Baracus, and produced by the Métis and Me program, with support from our sponsors, 880 Cities and the Ontario Changemakers program, along with the Métis Nation of Ontario's culture-based economic development grant. Make sure to like and subscribe for more episodes.